Welcome to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, it appears that heavyweight prospect Tony Yoka eyes a summer showdown with Johan Duhaupas. The French heavyweight Tony Yoka, 5-0, but currently suspended for testing positive to a forbidden substance, said Saturday night in Paris that he would like to fight Johan Duhaupas, 37-5, this summer in what would be an all-Frenchman showdown. Duhaupas' manager comments that Yoka needs to show Duhaupas a lot more respect and points out the level of opponents that Johan has fought in the last few years. Still, with Network Canal plus back in boxing, this is a fight that may indeed happen. And these are just my reactions to this proposed matchup. You know, one, I think that this Boxing Scene article needs to be fact-checked because while Tony Yoka is in fact under suspension, it's not for testing positive for a banned substance. The March reports from way back when that indicated that Tony Yoka was suspended, they cited missed doping tests. Not tests where he tested positive, so much as tests where he never actually got tested at all. So, I don't know what the discrepancy here is. I don't know that these guys assumed that he tested positive for something, but the earlier reports citing his suspension indicated that it was over missed doping tests, not actually testing positive for something. Nevertheless, a Tony Yoka versus Johan Duhaupas fight. Let's talk about that. You know, it is very much true that Johan Duhaupas has been in there with a far better caliber of opponents, far higher quality of opponents than anyone Tony Yoka has had the opportunity to fight so far. And, you know, he's 5-0. What do you expect? So, Johan Duhaupas would definitely be a step up in competition for Tony Yoka.
A considerable one.
Now, I'll say this much. It's a considerable step up, but it is the right kind of move in the sense that, you know...
It's an experience fight.
That's the kind of opponent that forces you to be better. That's the kind of opponent that actually gives you something to have to work around. You know, you can go in there fighting club fighters and pad your record till you're 20 or 30-0, but you're not going to learn anything from those guys. They're not bringing the same experience level that a guy like Johan Duhaupas would bring to the table. A guy who takes a good punch, a guy who showed some toughness, showed some grit with some very high-quality fighters. That's the right kind of guy to make you a better fighter. We saw something very similar this weekend between Erickson Lubin and Ishe Smith. And a very interesting fight, that fight, because we know that Erickson Lubin has already suffered his first career loss at the hands of one of the Charlo brothers. And ahead of that fight, you know, I said that I didn't see the right kind of names in Erickson Lubin's resume leading up to that fight. I didn't see the right kind of seasoned veterans, seasoned journeyman guys who have been in world title situations or who have fought world-class opponents. I didn't see those kinds of names in Erickson Lubin's resume ahead of the Charlo fight, and it was for that reason that I picked Charlo to win. I didn't feel that Lubin had the right kind of experience fights. Whereas this weekend, he had just that kind of fight against Ishe Smith. That's the kind of opponent you want to see. You want to see 2 or 3 Ishe Smiths on an up-and-comer's resume so you have a good barometer for where he actually is. Because if he's looking good, you know, it all depends on who he's looking good against. I'm of the opinion that he could have stood to fight with Ishe Smith before he even had that Charlo fight, and that would have been a better barometer for where he was. And it's a similar kind of logic here between Tony Yoka and Johan Duhaupas that, you know, before you go rushing into, you know, world title situations and just, you know, all that kind of stuff, you need to fight those seasoned veterans, those seasoned journeymen, those guys that give you something to have to work around, because in fighting those guys, you get better in the process.
Grow as a fighter.
It's a gradual progression from the intensity and the difficulty level of opponents. Thus, a guy like Johan Duhaupas brings enough to the table that you get a good barometer for where Tony Yoka is, what he needs to improve on, and what are his strong suits, if there are any at all. It's the right kind of fight for Tony Yoka. So I'll say this much. They've got the right idea. That's the way you bring a guy along. You've got to put him in interesting situations with interesting opponents so that you get a good idea of where he really is and where you want him to be. So as soon as that suspension is over, I'd like to see that fight. I'd like to see Tony Yoka fight a guy like Johan Duhaupas. I wouldn't mind seeing Tony Yoka fight a Eric Molina. I wouldn't mind seeing Tony Yoka fight a Robert Helenius, Kubrat Pulev, some of those guys that are out there. I wouldn't mind seeing those kinds of fights at all, because those are the fights that more or less make sense for a guy who's only 5-0. Tony Yoka shows a lot of promise. I mean, The way this guy's built, the weight is distributed evenly. You know, he's solid. He's a tall kid. He's got the same kind of physical dimensions as a Deontay Wilder or an Anthony Joshua, but he's not as bulky as Joshua, and he's not as lean as Deontay Wilder. He's right there in the middle. The quality of this guy's movements are very fluid. He shows a lot of fluidity very early in his career, and this is where his promise lies. That you definitely got a heavyweight in Tony Yoka, but he doesn't quite move like a heavyweight. He almost looks like a middleweight out there, except he's the size and the stature of a heavyweight. So you can see how that combination, that convergence of attributes might lend itself to his career. So, you know, let's see what happens. Let's see if they make that fight a reality once that suspension is over. In other news, updates on the return of Chino Maidana, and it appears that he's going to be coming back under the PBC banner, which is no surprise because he already had a pre-existing relationship with Al Heyman. And the article cites how Marcos Maidana very much intends to return to the welterweight division. He does intend to return as a welterweight. Given the amount of weight that he's put on, you know, he's got some pounds to shed before he can actually have a fight. And we know who Marcos Maidana named in his comeback video. He said names like, you know, Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather, Amir Khan. The ghosts of yesteryear, essentially. Because a lot of those guys, you know, they did what they had to do in the sport of boxing. Some of them are still floating around, more or less. But those guys are already accomplished, and some of them are already involved in other situations. There were rumors floating around of a, you know, Marcos Maidana-Manny Pacquiao fight. And I think that there's value in that fight. I do. But that's not more intriguing to me than, say, Marcos Maidana versus
DSG.
Danny Garcia, for example. Marcos Maidana versus Sean Porter. You understand, those kinds of fights that would match an old era's fighter against the younger lions that are floating around. And some of those younger lions, they've actually got something for Marcos Maidana to win. They've got world titles.
To spice up the fight.
I can understand what Marcos sees in a potential Pacquiao fight, for example. I understand the rhyme and the reason for that. Dollar signs. That Manny Pacquiao does still generate revenue at the end of the day, and those are the kinds of fights you want to be in when you're a semi-retired fighter. So I understand that, but I'm of the opinion that there are other situations out there that don't involve him chasing the ghosts of yesteryear. That a Danny Garcia versus Marcos Maidana fight would generate just as much interest or a comparable interest. It's a fight of some value. If you ask me,
what do you want to see?
What I would prefer to see, should Marcos Maidana in fact return? If you ask me what I would want to see, I'd want to see him fight those younger guys so we get a look at how they fare against each other. It's just more appealing to me than seeing, you know, two semi-retired guys fighting each other.
Old guys.
Now, presumably, if Marcos Maidana is to gear this comeback, and he does at some point participate as a welterweight, you can imagine that his first fight back isn't going to be against a Danny Garcia or a Sean Porter or anybody like that. He's going to need one or two tune-up fights before he's prepared to really
get back in the mix of things.
Fight someone who's on the world level. Fight someone at that stage in their career. You know, Marcos has been out of the ring for some time. You know, the last time this guy fought, he lost back-to-back to Floyd Mayweather. So he's definitely going to need to rebound. Thus, he's likely going to fight rebound kinds of opponents. And that's okay. Understandable. But, I think the time frame of a Marcos Maidana comeback is what I'm highlighting here. That, look, we're not close to that. Before we even get to that, Marcos has got to lose the weight. Once he loses the weight, we can expect to see him fight in one or two tune-up fights. You know, not necessarily showcase fights so much as tune-up fights to prepare him for what he's going to be facing out there. Then after that, maybe we see him in a world title situation or just with a world-level opponent. A more interesting situation. Essentially, what I'm getting at is, while the news is coming in, don't hold your breath to see Marcos Maidana in the ring anytime soon, because he's still got to lose the weight, he's still got to tune up with somebody after he loses the weight, and then maybe we'll see him in an interesting situation. Those are my thoughts. In other news, WBC 140-pound champion Jose Ramirez is saying that he wants unifications, and he might give it a shot at 147 pounds. And in the article, it talks about how Jose Ramirez feels that he's beaten all the top contenders and he's ready for bigger opponents, bigger fights. Top-ranked CEO Bob Arum did mention, he did dabble with the idea of Jose Ramirez potentially fighting Terrence Crawford, who is the WBO champion at 147 pounds. And these are my thoughts. You know, I don't want to see Jose Ramirez leave the 140-pound division having not fought another champion like himself. You understand? There are other guys, other scalps out there that make for more interesting, more competitive fights than a Terrence Crawford fight at 147 pounds. It's not the right time for a Terrence Crawford fight. It's just not. Jose Ramirez has more to prove at 140 before Terrence Crawford even comes into the conversation. You still have the winner of the World Boxing Super Series to contend with. You still have Maurice Hooker to contend with. The same Maurice Hooker who expressed an interest in fighting Jose Ramirez post-fight after the Alex Salcedo fight. That is a fight that makes much more sense to me than Jose Ramirez going up there to welterweight to fight Terrence Crawford. Against Terrence Crawford, he's fish food. We all know that. You haven't done everything you can do at 140, so what's the point in even looking at 147?
It's too soon.
At the end of the day, Terrence Crawford right now is acclimating to the welterweight division by fighting welterweights. Throwing him in there with a 140-pound fighter is pretty pointless. If I wanted to see Terrence Crawford fighting 140-pound fighters, then
Why even move up?
Wouldn't that go against everyone's request that he move up? You know, remember, when Terrence Crawford was unifying the division, people were waiting for him to move up to the 147-pound division so he can square off with the guys that are up there. Okay, that's what he's trying to do. Doesn't make much sense to match him against a 140-pound fighter now.
Pointless.
In turn, for Jose Ramirez, you know, he's just not ready for a fight like that. I don't want to see that fight. I would rather much see a unification fight, at least one, at 140 before we even start talking about 147. The idea that Jose would leave that weight class with all that unfinished business, all those undefeated champions and contenders, just all those interesting situations that have yet to occur. The idea that he would leave that to go up there and do what at 147? You barely did anything at 140.
For Christ's sake.
And to be quite honest, you know, Maurice Hooker, if he is successful in March, Maurice Hooker will be available, and that is a fairly doable fight. You know, Maurice Hooker's last fight with Alex Salcedo, Top Rank actually helmed the promotions for that fight, you understand? They promoted that event. So the cross-promotional element is there because Maurice Hooker's a Matchroom USA fighter. And yet he was still able to fight against one of Top Rank's guys in a Top Rank event. So it's doable. We could see a Jose Ramirez versus Maurice Hooker fight. It's entirely possible, in which case I would much rather see that between two undefeated champions from the same weight class than watch Jose Ramirez go up to welterweight for Terrence Crawford and be a fish out of water. It doesn't make sense to me. Not right now, not one, not two, not three fights from now. It makes no sense to me. You know, there's a virtual cornucopia of sizzling fights for Jose Ramirez right there in his own weight class. There's any variety of good fights. There's the winner of the World Boxing Super Series to consider, but also the other participants. You know, after that whole thing is over, Jose Ramirez against any one of those guys, Ivan Bedenchik, Josh Taylor, Regis Prograis, Kirill Rillick, any one of those fights are good fights, and that's not even counting Maurice Hooker as a potential fight. You know, the growth of Jose Ramirez as a fighter is just as important as the growth of Terrence Crawford as a fighter. Right now, Terrence Crawford is at 147 pounds fighting 147-pound fighters. That's what he needs to be doing. He doesn't need to waste any of his time, waste any time in camp for guys from 140. He just came from 140. He unified all the titles at 140. Thus, seeing him against 140-pound fighters is a redundancy. And for Jose Ramirez, he'd just be biting off more than he could chew. It would be an unnecessary loss and unnecessary risk. So I'll be honest, I'd like to see Jose Ramirez continue to campaign as a champion at 140 for the foreseeable future. I think he's got a lot of unfinished business there. I think he needs to make a name for himself there before he even looks at 147.
Just doesn't make sense.
Those are just my thoughts. Feel free to disagree.
Why would you jump ship at the first sign of something that you didn't like? Where was the benefit of the doubt for me? Because
that's a good point.
If I'm rolling with you, I may see something and say, man, what was that about?
Right.
But I'm going to say, you know what? I feel like I vouch for this guy's character. Let me let him explain himself and maybe down the road and, you know, kind of clarify whatever. But it was like an initial attack on me. And I'll say this. When you posed your first question, you said us, right? Now, personally, me, I'm half white, I'm half black. I'm not pro-black, I'm pro-everybody.
But Kovalev, okay, you know the energy was a Kovalev war, though.
Let me finish. I'm pro-everybody. That's me. But you used that as an opportunity to benefit your page.
No.
Let me tell you why.
Okay, continue.
Because You got Wilder riled up about it. Let him know, baby. Let him know. You posted things over and over, and really, I'm gonna be honest with you. You benefited from it. I didn't watch the videos you posted, but of course, I got people coming back to me telling me about them. It's interesting to me. Why would he take an opportunity like that to benefit from it? And
you're using the wrong word, using the wrong adjective, the wrong verb. Okay.
How am I benefiting? Because every video you post, you're profiting from it, right? With all due respect, my brother, every time an African American fighter, every time they have something going on, you post it. Anytime,
give a primary example.
It could be Javante versus Shakur on social media. You gonna post it. It could be something that wasn't even nothing between Andre Ward and Wilder. You post it. You're looking like an opportunist to me. Now,
continue.
Yeah, you look because again, if you were doing your page for free out of the goodness of your heart and for the love of the sport, I wouldn't be able to say this.
Okay.
But if you were pro us, like you said, I didn't say that. You said that. If you're pro us, see right now you benefit from this. A tricky, immovable target like who he just fought, Tyson Fury. Punchers, look, you think Wilder's seen a guy that can move like that at that size? He may not want to go through that. But you didn't like it because it's personal, my brother.
No, you
bringing race into it.
It's always race. It's always race in boxing. It's always race. Ward Kovalev wasn't. Yes, go ahead.
That was Andre Ward addressing barbershop compilations, constipation, conversation. And Andre Ward said many of the things you've heard me say here on this channel. That channels like Barbershop Conversations, who look to turn over a profit from how many views they get, who look for donations from their subscribers, they go about this in a very tactless and parasitic way because they like to make boxing issues into race issues because they know those kinds of issues and those kinds of headlines for a video, they're going to get that many more views, thus they're going to garner more of a profit in doing so. And it's opportunistic. That's what it is. That these guys very much do their best to try to peddle a racial agenda, but they're really only doing it for profit because they know you slap a certain headline on there, you accuse certain guys of certain shit, and what happens? You turn over a profit because that many more people watch your video. Now, Andre Ward addressed this beautifully.
Yes, he did.
And I'm glad that he exposed Barbershop Conversations because he needs to be exposed. This is a guy, one of those guys, that
Sean Wilder's dead.
I guess was angry that Andre Ward felt that, Wilder, maybe he wouldn't be too keen on a Fury rematch. And whether he was or he wasn't is besides the point because the way that message was received by channels like Barbershop Conversations and other channels that are members of the LDBC, the way that was received was they started attacking Andre Ward, the same guy that they used to go up to bat for. The same guy that, they go all out for Andre Ward unless the subject becomes Deontay Wilder. And that highlights the fickle nature of those channels and how they're just basically using these boxers and these boxing topics as a means to put money in their pocket. Because even Andre Ward highlighted it. And I've said it many times here on this channel that these guys are looking to turn over a profit. Whereas a channel like mine, I'm just doing this because I'm a boxing enthusiast, because I'm a fan of the sport. I'm not looking to bilk my subscribers for their money. So when you're seeing what you're seeing on this channel, these are discussion topics. I can feel how I feel about it, you can feel how you feel about it, but it's all free of charge. It's basically a conversation, whereas these guys peddle propaganda to skew perspectives and turn over a profit. Making it that much more opportunistic, that you are in fact exploiting the situations that are going on in the sport of boxing, telling those stories a certain way, and it's also that you can put money in your pocket. And that these kinds of channels are basically exploiting their own community, because at its base what they're really looking to do is turn over a profit. Thus, the content that they upload to their channels caters to a certain demographic, is delivered a certain way, that their version of the quote-unquote news doesn't really stick to the facts. Its focal point is to put money in their pocket. I think Andre Ward said what I've been saying for months now, that Barbershop Conversations and those kinds of channels like the LDBC channels, all they're really trying to do is bilk money from their subscribers. That's why their news is often inaccurate, and that's why their criticisms are often uneven. And I guess it took Andre Ward, a pound-for-pound fighter, to expose those guys, like Barbershop Conversations, to expose them for what they really are.
Leeches and
parasites.